He wanted to be famous. And that's the most terrifying part of all. Because it worked. Somewhere between the summer of 1968 and the fall of 1969, a man decided that the best way to make the world pay attention to him was to kill people and then write letters about it. Not to law enforcement in secret, not in a private confession. He mailed them to newspapers. He demanded front-page coverage. He signed them with a circle and a cross, a symbol that looked almost like a gun sight, and called himself the Zodiac. And now, more than 50 years later, we still don't know who he was. That alone should unsettle you. Because this wasn't some ghost in the woods. This was a man who taunted police, sent coded messages to the press, kept count of his victims like a scoreboard, and simply disappeared. No final arrest, no dramatic confession, no deathbed revelation. He just stopped. And the silence he left behind is somehow more disturbing than the letters ever were. To understand why this case still haunts America, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to the first confirmed Zodiac murder, but to a cold December night in 1968, in a place called Lake Herman Road, on the outskirts of Benicia, California. Two teenagers, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were parked on a remote stretch of road the way teenagers sometimes do. They were on their first date. They were 17 and 16 years old. They were shot. David once in the head, Betty Lou 5 times in the back as she tried to run. The killer left nothing at the scene. No witnesses, no motive, no explanation. Just two young people who had their whole lives ahead of them, and a darkness that had just announced itself without saying a word. 7 months passed. Then, on July 4th, 1969, Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau were parked near Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo. A car pulled up alongside them. A man approached with a flashlight. Shots were fired. Darlene died. Mike somehow survived, and his account of the shooter's face would become one of the most scrutinized descriptions in American criminal history. But here's the detail most people overlook. About 40 minutes after the shooting, someone called the Vallejo Police Department from a payphone. He calmly reported the murder. He also claimed responsibility for the killings at Lake Herman Road the previous December. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't remorseful. He sounded like a man checking something off a list. Then the letters came. On August 1st, 1969, 3 California newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, each received a nearly identical letter. Each letter contained 1/3 of a 408-symbol cryptogram. The writer demanded the ciphers be printed on the front page and threatened to go on a killing rampage if they weren't. He said the coded message contained his identity. Within days, a married couple from Salinas, Donald and Betty Harden, 2 schoolteachers with no professional cryptographic training, cracked it. What did it say? Not a name, not an address, not anything investigators could use. Instead, it read like a manifesto written by someone who genuinely believed something deeply wrong about the afterlife. He wrote about collecting slaves for his life in the afterlife, about enjoying the thrill of the kill, about how the police would never catch him because he was too clever. He was right about one thing. They never caught him. Then came Lake Berryessa. September 27th, 1969. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were picnicking on the shore when a man approached wearing a hooded costume, black cloth with the zodiac symbol stitched on the chest. He tied them both up. Then he stabbed them repeatedly, almost methodically. Brian survived. Cecilia did not. Before leaving, the killer walked to Brian's car and used a black felt-tip pen to write the dates of his previous attacks on the door, along with a new notation. by knife. He was evolving. He was keeping records. He was proud. 2 weeks later, on October 11th, San Francisco cab driver Paul Stine was shot in the head at the corner of Washington and Cherry Streets in the Presidio Heights neighborhood. This time, the killer didn't flee cleanly. Witnesses saw him. A couple of teenagers watched from a window across the street as the shooter calmly wiped down the cab, tore off a piece of Stine's shirt, and walked north into the Presidio neighborhood. Police cars drove right past him. Officers had been given the wrong suspect description over the radio. One of the most chilling near misses in criminal history, and no one even realized it until it was too late. Days later, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. Inside was a piece of Paul Stine's bloody shirt. Proof of concept. Proof he'd been there. Now the city was terrified. School buses were put under police protection after the Zodiac threatened to shoot children as they boarded in the mornings. He sent letters with taunting, almost playful language, sometimes calling the police blue meanies, signing off with running body counts that investigators believe were inflated to create more fear. He was performing. He understood media. He understood that the threat of murder was nearly as powerful as murder itself. And then the investigators caught something that should have broken the case wide open. A man named Arthur Lee Allen. By the early 1970s, he had emerged as the most compelling suspect the case had ever produced. He had been investigated before, in the late 1960s, after a conversation at a party where he allegedly told someone he was thinking about hunting humans and calling himself Zodiac. He owned a Zodiac brand watch, the exact watch whose symbol matches the killer's signature. He had been banned from a school where children could have been easy targets. He owned knives, wore wing walker boots consistent with footprints found at crime scenes, and had no solid alibi for the nights of multiple murders. A search of his home in 1991 turned up bomb-making materials, a bag labeled Lou Gehrig's disease, containing what appeared to be child pornography, and a typewriter. And yet, his handwriting didn't match. His fingerprints didn't match the prints lifted from Paul Stine's cab. And the one thing that could definitively tie a killer to a crime in the modern era, DNA from the saliva on envelope flaps, didn't match Allen either. Arthur Lee Allen died in 1992 of a heart attack. He was never charged. He took whatever he knew to the grave. But here's where the case becomes something more than a manhunt. It becomes a mirror. Because even after Allen's death, investigators kept working. The FBI, amateur codebreakers, retired detectives, podcasters, documentary filmmakers, all of them drawn to this case like it was a gravitational field. In 2020, a group of amateur codebreakers called the Zodiac Cipher Project, a team of mathematicians, software engineers, and puzzle enthusiasts from across 3 countries, cracked the killer's so-called 340 cipher. It had sat unsolved for 51 years. When they finally decoded it, investigators rushed to the message with desperate hope. And what did they find? More rambling, more bragging. The phrase, "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me," a reference to a gas chamber, and a taunting non-clue. "I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise." He still didn't give his name. After 51 years, the message was as useful as the first. In 2021, a group called the Casebreakers, a team of more than 40 former law enforcement and intelligence officials, publicly announced they had identified the Zodiac as Gary Francis Post, a house painter from the Sierra Nevada foothills who died in 2018. They pointed to scars on Post's forehead that allegedly matched dashes in a coded symbol, to similarities in his handwriting, and to photos found in a darkroom in his former home. Law enforcement did not respond with enthusiasm. The FBI stated the case remains unsolved. Critics of the theory called the evidence circumstantial and the methodology questionable. And so we're left standing in the same place we've always been, staring at the circle and the cross, wondering, what kind of person does this? Not just the killing, many killers have killed, but the writing, the careful planning, the theatrical costuming at Lake Berryessa, the collect call to the police dispatcher, calm and certain. The letters sent not to investigators, but to newspapers, because newspapers meant readers, readers meant fear, and fear was the real product he was selling. Criminologists have noted for decades that the Zodiac's behavior doesn't fit neatly into the profiles built for serial killers of his era. He wasn't escalating the way killers typically do. He wasn't selecting victims by a consistent type. He wasn't driven by sexual obsession in any way forensic evidence confirmed. He was driven by something rarer and more disturbing: the need for an audience. He wanted you to think about him, right now, while you're watching this. The last confirmed Zodiac letter arrived in 1974. By some counts, he had killed 5 confirmed victims. By his own count, at least 37. Investigators believe the true number is somewhere between those two figures. Several suspicious murders in the early 1970s have been connected to him with varying degrees of credibility. Then the letters stopped. The killings, as far as anyone could prove, stopped. A man who had gone out of his way to taunt and tease and stay connected to the world simply went silent. Did he die? Did he move? Was he imprisoned for an unrelated crime? Did he simply lose interest, the way someone might abandon a project that no longer gave him satisfaction? No one knows. And that might be the most honest sentence ever written about this case. Here is the thing about unsolved murders. They don't just leave the families behind. They leave a wound in the culture. The Zodiac case changed how California police departments communicated with each other. It changed how the media covered active killers, eventually leading to debates about whether reporting on manifestos does exactly what the killers want. It inspired a generation of investigators, writers, filmmakers. David Fincher's 2007 film depicted not just a murder investigation, but the psychological destruction that obsession with an unsolvable case leaves in its wake. Robert Graysmith, the cartoonist turned amateur detective whose book inspired the film, spent decades of his life on this case. He never definitively solved it. Nobody has. The Cipher Project is still active. Amateur investigators are still posting theories. DNA technology keeps advancing. The Zodiac's case file sits in law enforcement databases, technically open, technically unsolved. But maybe that's exactly what he wanted. A man who built his entire identity around being uncatchable, around being smarter, around being the one thing you'd never stop thinking about. Maybe his greatest achievement isn't the murders. Maybe it's this. He turned America into an audience, and he never gave them an ending. No finale, no justice, no name. Just that symbol, that circle, that cross, still watching you back.